Okay, we're live. Thank you everyone for tuning in and welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sib. I'm speaking with Tab Ahmad, which is a really exciting chat around employment and both Tab's personal journey in terms of setting up EmployAbility and all the challenges that many of our guests have spoke about, trying to create new initiatives and businesses and projects. It's going to be very insightful, that side of it, but obviously more the bigger picture of employment for disabled people is a very important issue on a number of levels. So thank you, first of all, for joining me today, Tab.
Thank you for having me, Martin. Delighted to be here.
Well, where do you live? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Northwest London, sunny Northwest London today. Beautiful
day. Yeah.
So sunny in lots of parts, I think, but particularly in my garden in Northwest London. So very happy about that.
That's been the upside of the lockdown, is that just not being in cars and trains and traveling around the country, but just been able to be in the garden more of the sunny weather. So yeah, sounds good. Well, yeah, as always, it'd be great for you to kick off with a bit of a sort of bio, background summary of what you've been up to in recent times.
In recent times, well, I
as far as you want as well, by the way.
So in recent times, let's start with that, shall we? In recent times, it's been strange. It's obviously a strange time for everybody. And when this all first started, I mean, we went into sort of social distancing quite early because my 92-year-old mother lives with us. So we had to be very, very careful. So really early, like around about the 11th or 12th of March or something like that. And I think at the beginning of all of this, I remember saying to my team, look, let's just all take a big collective breath. Let's step back a bit. We don't have to rush with getting things out there and things to advise companies or advise students. I really wanted everybody to have the chance to properly deal with sort of things happening for them emotionally, practically, and to think, okay, we have time for this, and actually for myself as well. Yeah. So I had to just be really sure that I could manage my own sort of mental and emotional state around this, around worrying about my mother and all of those sorts of things. But and I was just mindful. I have a sort of not all the time, but I get panic attacks, and so I just had to be very, very careful that wasn't going to be feeding into that. Yeah. And at the beginning, it was a bit like being in survival mode, wasn't it? I think for everybody.
Yeah, big adjustment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you sort of adapt. I think we're very good at adapting as human beings. So then you adapt, and everybody sort of adjusts to the new normal. And we've got to a point, I think, of where, in many ways, for myself, I feel like I'm back to being as busy as ever. That whole sort of let's take a collective breath has sort of evaporated somewhere, and sort of back to just normality. And then those times we'd have, I was talking to somebody earlier who was saying she really misses her tube journeys, and she was saying, I know it's strange, but I guess those are sort of times to be in your headspace and thinking.
That's true, yeah.
And suddenly we don't really have those. I mean, I know for myself, I have back-to-back meetings and constantly busy before I know it's 8 o'clock and I don't know where the day's gone.
Crazy, isn't it?
For a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I guess it's, as always, the pros and cons of different situations. As I sort of said, for me, there's, I've not yet missed the earlier starts and the longer travels for meetings that I can do on Zoom and not have that sort of that fatigue around with the travel. But I agree with you that I know when I'm on those journeys, I do a lot more listening to an audio book or just having my thoughts more in order, whereas it is literally barely time to nip to the loo and get a cup of tea before the next video call. So no, it's an interesting point. So can you explain to everyone a bit more about EmployAbility and how you got into employment and disability in the beginning?
Yeah, so I set EmployAbility up back in 2006, so some 15 years ago or something like that, because I really felt that there was a gap in the market for the support that's offered, particularly to talented disabled university students and graduates, and within that I include neurodiversity as well, of course. Yeah. And then the connection between those people and employers. So in the war for talent, I felt employers were really missing out. in terms of disabled, neurodiverse and neurodiverse candidates, I just felt that they too are missing out on the careers that they deserve, that they ought to be applying to, and not kind of falling off a cliff after university. So some great support that's available through disability officers at university for students to be able to access the coursework and stuff. But then what happens in their onward journey? And I think that was the piece where I thought, actually, it's really worthwhile thinking about that piece and what support can be put in place. So the work that we do at EmployAbility in terms of supporting disabled neurodiverse people is very much focused around university students and graduates. But in terms of work we do with employers, it's much wider than that. So with employers, we get involved, yes, sometimes with that piece of that attraction marketing to that group, but also looking at more widely recruitment processes, inherent barriers that might be there, their sort of adjustments process, the education piece around getting people to really understand, well, what is disability, how does it impact in the workplace, all of those sorts of things. And then getting the buy-in, really, because there's some fantastic work being done by Valuable 500, by Business Disability Forum, in terms of engaging senior level executives. There's some fabulous work, and it's really necessary work. But what I'm really interested in is how does that feed through to on the ground in reality? What does that actually look like in real terms? And that's really where we get involved. So those are kind of the two pieces, and it's been a journey for us as well. Of course, it's been a journey, some changes, some really interesting changes that in the last few weeks, of course. But in terms of being able to offer things more remotely, being able to support more remotely, so it was really exciting for me last week doing a training session, what we call our disability empowerment training sessions for Google employees remotely. So one for people across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and then another one for their Asia Pacific offices. And that was super exciting. And normally I run these things and, I quite enjoy them, actually. I quite like it. I love the interaction with the audience. I love the audience participation. I sort of feed off, what the audience is giving me back.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found this, but doing it actually to camera remotely is entirely different.
Totally. You don't get that feedback so much, do you?
So you're sort of doing it in a void, and it's really strange, and it's way more interesting. But that was really exciting, and I was really pleased that we can actually still do and deliver things like that. Actually, in the end, it worked pretty well, so it was fine. And then we've been doing a whole series of our Next Generation Inclusive Thinking webinars for students in universities, and we've run 4 in our first series. So things like your rights, your choice, your adjustments, those sorts of things, which we can talk about in a minute, because I'm really passionate about those things. And then we had an open Q&A session. We had a session on adjustments in the time of COVID. How does that look different? You mentioned Zoom fatigue earlier. That's a really big one for particularly some of the students that we work with, people with neurodiverse conditions, people on the autistic spectrum, mental health conditions. So I think these are all sort of things that we're learning as we go, and really listening to the people that we work with, the people we support, to understand what the particular challenges for them.
Yeah.
And it's been great to engage with some of the universities. We're doing some remote webinars for them, specifically for certain students at certain universities, attending some remote careers fairs and one-to-one sessions. And then we want to be able to do the same for employers as well. But, as I said, we've been doing some training and so on with some of our employers. So, it's been different, but in different ways of delivery. But actually, the work remains the same. The message is the same.
It's just the way that everyone's obviously had to adapt with the current goings on. As I said earlier, I think there's 2 tracks I'm interested to discuss a bit more. One is the sort of how you've found it setting up the business at the beginning, and the sort of funding models, and just the general challenges of growing a team. I think that's just, for our audience, is always generally quite interesting around the professional side for you. And then obviously we'll also look at the sort of bird's eye view around, I was thinking how when we look at inclusion, there's disabled people, and then it could be recruitment, and it could be marketing and advertising, and it could be goods and services, all the different parts of where we want to be included in society. And as you say, there's both sides of the table that has to be encouraged and educated and empowered, so that when you're working with jobs and recruitment, I imagine that as much as recruiters have to understand what barriers are and how to not discriminate or put up, accidental barriers when employing from a diverse workforce. I know I've seen a lot that disabled people don't always feel confident and have the self-esteem to upskill or to go for those jobs. So I think that those two areas would be quite interesting to tackle. Have you got a preference where you want to start?
God, you must be a massive multi-part. It's what we call, I was doing a presentation this last week to students. If you get asked a massive multi-part question, how do you begin with that? That's what you've just given me, Martin.
Yeah, it's just very much your thoughts, really. But let's start with the entrepreneur side. To sort of, just because you were saying about why you started doing the work that you've been doing, like what were some of the challenges over the last 10 years, not COVID-19, but just generally?
Different challenges. Yeah, I mean, look, it's starting any small business is always a challenge. My background before that was I had worked for a sort of medium to large size charity where I'd set up their business arm before that. So I sort of knew the area that I was really passionate about working in. And before that, I was a headhunter. I had a headhunting business for working with investment banks. So if you look at the sectors that we work in, finance, investment banking, law, and tech, it's because they're the animals I'm familiar with, and it's the areas we really add value in because we know them really well. It doesn't mean we won't work with other companies. Of course we will if we're asked to. Yeah. But there's connections between those sectors, and that's one of the reasons why we are in those sectors. We understand those sectors really well. In terms of challenges, so I decided to set up EmployAbility because I really felt, I was saying earlier, there was a gap, there was a space for that. There was support needed both from employers and from disabled people, and particularly students. But setting up any new business is small. At the time when I set up EmployAbility, I had a 2-year-old. I then had a baby 2 years later, another one. So I had young children. That was challenging. That brought challenges. And of course, that had an impact on the speed at which I've chosen to grow the business and what I've done with it as well. But I think the key part for me was always my interest in the subject, my passion for the subject. And really kind of that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is I feel passionately about the work that I do. I feel passionately about creating a place where there's opportunities available for everybody, irrespective of their difference, and making sure that is a level playing field for everyone. So I think that those are the key drivers for me, an inclusive society. But yes, some of the challenges at the beginning were, having employers who are going to engage with you.
I was thinking, because there's obviously no shortage of disabled people finding challenges to get to the workplace or be at the retention of disabled staff, as much as recruitment, I imagine, is a big HR KPI that businesses are looking to. But I wondered about how the sort of business development was, because I imagine it was quite hard in the beginning to just get the right people at the right time to listen.
Yeah, and it's changed over time as well. So when I first came into this space, there wasn't much work being done in this space. There was hardly any work being done in this space in terms of the sort of stuff that we were trying to do. Disability was, not a diversity strand that was that popular with employers. It was, ethnicity and gender and those sorts of things, and later LGBTQ. But and those are really important diversity strands, so not taking anything away from those. But disability was by far the least thought of, the least understood, in many ways the most challenging, because, as you know, there are so many different types of disabilities. The term disability itself, not everybody identifies with that, even if legally they're covered by that definition. And and they're not necessarily a homogeneous group of people. So there were challenges, and then for employers to kind of get their heads around those challenges, what that meant, there weren't necessarily template solutions. And so I think all of those things were problematic. But you know what? Slowly we started engaging, first of all, with the investment banking sector, and then sort of the journey was investment banking sector, legal sector, some oil and gas, and then tech. You know, and so it was really challenging talking to the employers and getting them on side, getting them to really understand why it was that in the war for talent, if they wanted the best people, they had to look at other sources of places they could get those people from, and why weren't these people coming to them? So that was a big challenge. Yeah. I think for in terms of the group we work with most, the students, I think that messaging that across universities, that this was a free support service we were offering to them. You talked about the business model earlier. So we are a not-for-profit. I know people think that means all sorts of different things. People think that means that we don't want to make money, but that's not true. We want to make money. What that means really is that all the money that we do make, all the profit that we do make, goes back into the business. Yeah. One, to keep the business going as a going concern, of course, and then secondly, to put it all back in to help and support more disabled people. So we don't have shareholders. We're not paying that out to them. We're putting everything back into the business. We don't get trust funding or government funding or anything else like that. So we rely solely upon the income we earn from the organizations that we work with. So the employers, universities to some extent, less so, but those are the two main sort of sources of income, employers mostly. And it's a free service to any disabled person who uses us.
Sure. No, that's really helpful. Got a couple of comments and questions coming in. I'll bring them up on the screen as well. So afternoon from Nana there, and Matt saying afternoon guys, both on LinkedIn, and
Hi,
Chris on Facebook is saying, do you find access to work a helpful tool?
So what's my answer to that? Less and less so in some ways is what I'd say. So at the beginning, when we started working with employers, a lot more employers were using access to work. Actually, well, first of all, many of them weren't aware of it, as many disabled people weren't, or maybe still aren't, and many employers weren't aware of it. So
can you give I'm just thinking of anyone that is watching that's not sure what it is. Could you just give a quick definition or description of what access to work is?
Yeah, so access to work is a pot of funding that is available from the government for adjustments in employment.
Yeah.
And it's accessed through the disabled person, but of course, to some extent, it's a business benefit in the sense that it means that the employer then doesn't have to pay for that adjustment. But to be really clear, whether or not you're able to get funding through access to work or not, the duty on the employer to make adjustments, reasonable adjustments, I'll call it what's called in the law, to make reasonable adjustments is a duty on the employer, irrespective of whether they can access the funding or not. So I think that's a really important point, that people shouldn't feel that if they can't get access to work funding, that therefore the employer doesn't have a legal duty to make the adjustment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So is it helpful or not? So as I was saying at the beginning, I think we used to recommend it to lots of employers. We'd helped, our candidates or people we were working with to help them write that access to work report. We'd liaise with access to work. Over time, certainly of the large employers that we work with, less and less of them are relying upon that. It became harder and harder to get that funding. And so either people aren't aware of it because it's not that well publicized, or if they are, certainly large corporates tend to use it less these days. But I can really see the benefits of it for smaller businesses for whom otherwise the cost of that adjustment might be quite onerous, depending on what it is.
Yeah. No, that's great. I hope that answers your question there, Chris, and let us know what your thoughts or experience are if you have any with I know Chris has got 2 children with a disability that are either out or just out of uni. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from Chris as well. And then Gavin saying, what role do job centres play in getting disabled people back into work, and what are the greatest challenges people face when using them?
So, I mean, we don't get much involved with that side of things because our focus in terms of the support we directly offer to disabled people is focused on disabled university students and graduates. Now, of course, some of them may be using job centres. So, I mean, like anywhere else, it's a sort of job board, isn't it? You can go there, you can look things up, probably remotely these days, look things up and apply to things through that route in the same way you can use it as another source of opportunities that you can find out about. But there are many other sources these days, of course. I know that obviously there might be some links with what benefits you can claim through that too, and being seen to be looking for employment. But there's probably lots of other ways you can evidence that these days, in fact. So I think the challenges are probably just around, I wouldn't look just in one place, I'd look in lots of different places if you're looking for employment, see what other sources you can find where things might be advertised.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Well, obviously I've got to head off a bit after past today because of another work meeting that I couldn't move. So we'll not wind down just yet, but we'll start moving towards the kind of what does the future bring in terms of for you and employability and generally employment of disabled people. But was there anything you wanted to mention of sort of what's going on recently or at the moment?
Yeah, so I think I sort of mentioned these briefly before, but yeah, the things that we've been really excited about in the last few months, really. So one is we've been doing a lot of work on our branding, which we haven't changed since we set up. So we're doing a lot of work on our branding and our website, which we're hoping to launch over the next couple of months. We're very excited about that. And then the other things that I've been, just really have been fabulous is our sort of next generation inclusive thinking webinars that we've been running for students and graduates and universities, career staff, and so on. We've had 4 of those. We're going to have a series of those, a sort of open Q&As. Anybody can join for free. Over the next few months, we'll send out details of those, put them up, and so on. And then
the website, will that be on your website? Yeah,
it will be on our website. Yes.
Yeah. What's the website link?
So the website link is. Do I need to type it in somewhere?
If you say it, I'll put it in the comments afterwards.
It's employability.org.uk.
Perfect. Okay, I'll pop that in afterwards.
So people can join that. And then we've launched our new inclusive university program, which lots of universities are signing up to, so we're super excited about that as well. And then, Martin, as you know, the things that I'm really passionate about, and more specifically, is things like how does the Equality Act, how does the law marry up with what's happening in real life, what's happening, and how are people using that? And I know you and I have had discussions about this. So things that have interestingly came out the webinar time and time again, the most asked question was around this piece around disclosure of disability.
Yes.
Do I need to tell the employer that I have a disability? Do I need to tell the employer I have a disability if I want adjustments? And so our first webinar really dealt with that, but it comes up in every session that question comes up. And our message on that is really loud and clear, and it is that you don't need to disclose your disability. In fact, we have sort of in our presentations, we have a page called Not Disclosure. I want people to stop using the term disclosure because actually it's got nothing to do with it. If you need adjustments, first of all, under Section 60 of the Equality Act, employer can't ask you anything about your disability. They can't ask you what it's called. They can't ask you if you have one. They can't ask you any details about it in the recruitment process. They can once they offer you a job, but not in the recruitment process. So to get adjustments, all you have to do is tell an employer what adjustments you need, not what disability you have. Just say, I need some adjustments, or you can say disability-related adjustments if you like, because obviously it's implicit in the fact you're asking for adjustments. You have a disability, but you don't have to say anything else, and they can't ask you. So we know that in reality, what happens is employers often do ask for things like proof or your educational psychologist report from university. Now, both of those things potentially are unlawful because they're giving information about your disability which they're not allowed to ask you about. So you're very within your rights to say, look, actually, I want to exercise my privacy and choice, and I'm not happy to send that information through to you, but here's my adjustments. You can do it in a really nice, polite way as well. And if you've got any students out there who are watching, of course, it's really tricky. It's very well for me to sit here and quote bits of the law and so on, but it can be really tricky for people to know, well, what do I do with that? And that's really hard. Do I want to fight with the employer I want to join? It's not a fight. It doesn't have to be a fight. It can be done in a polite, nice way. And we can advocate on your behalf if you're not comfortable to do that yourself. So we want more students and graduates to use us to advocate if they're not comfortable, because we understand it's tricky, it's difficult, and we'll provide that advocacy piece as well. So for us, I know you want to wind up really soon, but so for us going forward, for us, it's all about the next generation inclusive thinking. We want companies, employers, disabled people to really join us on this journey in being the next generation inclusive thinkers with us.
Yeah, sounds like a very good call to arms there. I love that. Kind of galvanizing way to end it. And just to touch on the thing you were saying before, it sounds like the word disclosure just sounds a bit weird anyway. Like it's just not a very positive feeling word, but actually it's not even you're not just saying we have to rename or rebrand the name. It's actually that it's not about saying your impairment or your health condition, it's just what your adaptions are. Is that correct?
Exactly. So I think that we've been on a journey with that word. That word goes back to the DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, before Equality Act 2010. But somehow that word has sort of stuck. Along the way in that journey, people have tried to redefine it. It became TEL, it became this, it became the other. All those different things. But I think really we've moved on in that conversation. I want to move that conversation on to let's just forget that word altogether. When it comes to recruitment, all it's about is your adjustments, actually.
Yeah.
Your privacy, your choice, your adjustments. If you want to talk about your disability, that's entirely your choice.
Sure. No one's saying don't talk about it, but it's not an obligation. Yeah.
It's not an obligation. Think about the relevance. Think about when you might want to, if you want to, or maybe you don't. That's fine too. But if you need adjustments, then you should certainly talk about those, because without those, you won't have a level playing field. So it's all just about the adjustments. Now, when you get employment, the employer's duty changes quite significantly in terms of what they have to do to be compliant, do the right thing, etc. So at that point, they can ask you if you have a disability. You don't have to tell them, but they can ask you. But before that point, lawfully, they can't ask you, and they shouldn't be asking you, is the point. But you should be asking for adjustments that you need. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, we spoke as a few. It's been so interesting, these daily chats with different people from different parts of disability and inclusion. But I remember Cam at Disability Rights UK was just generally talking about knowing our rights, and I think when people feel clear and empowered on what those are, that it's easier because you just know how to navigate the world better.
Exactly. So it's definitely, I think it has to be used as a sort of solid starting point. And then there are choices you make with that. I mean, none of us kind of want to be reliant upon the law in the sense of then taking somebody to court or anything along those lines necessarily, certainly not with a potential employer we want to be joining. But it's really important to know what your rights are. And I think actually that message is the same. From our perspective, that message is the same for employers. And it's the same for disabled people. It's actually what Section 60 of the Equality Act actually says about this is this. And then you have to operate within it. And then once you both know what that is, it's the same message. It doesn't have to be confusing. It just has to be best practice of doing the right thing.
And on the other side, it's, with the work I'm doing with Purple Goat and inclusive marketing, the barrier is often on the business side, the unknown and the fear. But again, as you say, when it's kind of clearly written within the Equality Act, it is black or white in that sense.
Yeah, and people are really fearful. I mean, I know that certainly people with hidden disabilities, people, and I'm sure others too, but there's different points at which your disability may be hidden if you have a physical visible one, of course, an application, right? So for people, they really worry about that piece of, well, do I, if I tell an employer I have such and such condition, if I tell an employer I have dyslexia, for example, are they going to think I'm good enough? And a bit of that is also about imposter syndrome. A bit of that is worrying themselves that they're not good enough for some reason. And actually, when you position that and say, look, it's not about your intelligence, it's not about your capabilities, it's not about your skill set. This is just simply about what accommodations, what adjustments do you need to enable you to do the best you can do. And then you have a level playing field. You may or may not get that job based on other things, based on your based on
because of your disability.
But not exactly. But at least that way you have the level playing field and you have the best chance you can get of actually getting that role along with anybody else.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's not a guarantee, but it's a good chance, better chance, hopefully.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, everyone watching, if you've still got any other questions, after watch on the replay or whatever it might be, get in touch with Tab. I'll put the link up to the website that you mentioned as well, Tab. And yeah, really, really fascinating chat. And thank you for coming on today as well.
Thanks so much, Martin. Yeah, we'd love, as Martin said, anybody to get in touch. Employers, universities, students, all of you, please get in touch. We'd love to speak to you. And Martin, thank you so much for inviting me and for your time today as well.
No, absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. And yeah, everyone, I'm not going to be doing a show tomorrow because it was my non-wedding day. I was meant to get married tomorrow in Poland. So even though we're not now getting married, we've had to reschedule it. I'm going to take the day off and do something to mark the occasion. So I won't be on tomorrow, but I'll be back Monday for the next episode anyway. So have a lovely weekend.
Congratulations for tomorrow anyway, Martin. For your non-wedding day, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, nice one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.